Hey everyone, Tyler Mahanco back with a review of George and Tammy's third episode. Sorry it took a while to get this one online, but watching this TV show has actually become quite depressing for me, to the point that if there weren't so many people asking what I think about it, and if I hadn't already said I would review the whole series, I would stop watching this show. But I do the things I say I'm going to do, so here we are. The best thing I can say about this TV show at this point is that every moment Walton Goggins has meaningful screen time only makes it more clear he should have been the one playing George Jones. As I've said, he looks way more like him naturally, and it wouldn't take much makeup to turn him into a dead ringer. When Walton sang in this episode, it sounded so much more like George Jones than Michael Shannon ever could, and I would assume that was Walton deliberately going out of his way to not step on Shannon's role, to not sing like George Jones. Again, I'm not saying I think he could have pulled off a straight impersonation, but based on what I heard in this episode, I would be willing to bet Walton trying to sing anything remotely like George Jones would be bringing in far fewer complaints than the series is currently receiving regarding the actor's vocals. And this episode is when the singing inevitably became impossible to justify because it directly connects with the various ways this TV series is failing these people as characters. In my review of the previous episode, I pointed out how quickly in the first episode the writers moved us into the territory of George and Tammy are obviously in love with each other without giving any kind of significant time or action to how that happened. In this episode, the biggest question I walked away with is, why would any woman fall in love with George Jones the way he's written in this show? I kept thinking they were going to go back and cover this in flashbacks, as I said in the previous review. All we have seen George Jones do is act like an egotistical asshole when he's sober, be physically abusive when he's drunk, rant incessantly about how the business is going to pull them apart, and throw tantrums about his clothes. There has not been a flashback to cover it, so we haven't seen it, and apparently we're not going to see it. Can anyone pinpoint the moment this TV series made you understand why Tammy Wynette fell in love with this miserable person? I sure can't, because the fact is this is not the George Jones who Tammy fell in love with. This TV show is not even doing a good job of sticking to this version of George Jones they've come up with. The way they've written his tendency to run away from major concert appearances seems so much more as if he just doesn't want to do the job out of some childish resistance to responsibility, some kind of fuck the man attitude like he gives to Billy Sherrill on the lawnmower in this episode. As a result, whenever he makes any kind of comment about being worried that people may laugh at him, it sounds far less like the extreme stage fright Jones really did suffer and more like some excuse he's come up with because he wants to continue to act like a baby and throw another fit for no reason, as we've seen him do several times so far. So, when Tammy calls him a shy man in this episode, it simply does not track with the character we've been watching. Because another thing we see in this episode is George Jones being mean to a child for not singing perfectly, even though Jones himself was just singing terribly on the same song in the same scene. When I pointed out earlier how bizarre it was going to be to watch an actor sing poorly and then have the rest of the characters respond as if that actor is the best singer they've ever heard, never in a billion years could I have imagined this is how far they were going to try to push that. Even if this wasn't an insane scene to watch for that reason alone, it's also not something George Jones ever would have done because he was not a monster. As someone who is deeply familiar with these people and the way they behaved, I doubt it's possible for me to express what it's like to sit in front of a television and witness this collection of nonsense as if it's some kind of cohesive story. At this point, this series has stopped trying to tell you the story of George Jones and Tammy Wynette, any version of that story, and is more interested in presenting a bunch of cliched ideas people who have no idea what they're talking about would assume a relationship between two famous country singers must have been like. We are in pure fictional territory. The entire George Jones has to be sad and drunk in order to be a success story arc is a lie. This is something I call an authenticity fetish. It's something I hate more than almost anything because it has had very tragic consequences in the real world, killing many artists, killing many fans, killing many people I knew. I'm not going to get all the way into it here, but you can find things I've said in interviews and on Cocaine and Rhinestones about how dangerous this authenticity fetish is, and how it's a thing you almost always get when you allow writers who are more familiar with pop music or rock music to write what they believe they understand about country music without ever finding out what really happened. On top of being a lie, telling it here is ridiculously inconsistent since they set up the concept that Jones hasn't had a #1 hit because people want him to be sad, only to give him a #1 hit with We're Gonna Hold On. Not a sad song. So what the fuck is the point of this and why is it even here? Aside from all that, the narrative that Jones was basically a bum and his solo records were bombing is the polar opposite of the truth. His initial duets with Tammy Wynette didn't sell very well, certainly did not meet the expectations of their record label. Jones' solo work with Billy Sherrill was hitting the top 5 from the first album, and that would have been more than enough for both Billy and Jones to be happy with the records he was selling and the money his solo career was bringing in. The conceit that Tammy Wynette had to buy him a suit in order to play a concert in Las Vegas, not connected to reality in any way. This TV series has clearly decided that no matter what really happened, they're going to show you a George Jones who was a worthless and unlikable person who contributed basically nothing to Tammy Wynette's life and was only a pain in the ass for her. And if you have any questions about why Tammy Wynette would fall in love with such a person, well, that's your problem because the TV show is not going to tell you. So just, sit there and watch how hard it was for Tammy to deal with this total asshole. I will say I do understand their logic behind showing Jones being totally sober when he was off the booze, because that's less confusing than trying to communicate that his and Tammy's definitions of sobriety meant he only drank beer, not hard liquor. But those outdated notions of addiction were an extremely important factor in the way the true version of the story played out, and it affected Tammy Wynette's own addictions just as much as Jones. I was fairly certain this show would depict her relationship with drugs beginning after the emergency hysterectomy, as they did, and her drug problem certainly became worse at that point. But the full truth is she was taking diet pills, aka speed, at least as far back as when she was married to Don Chappell. And if we can believe the medical history she gave for herself, then her relationship with painkillers almost certainly also predates the relationship with George Jones. This was very much still the era of Mother's Little Helper, as the Rolling Stones sang about in the mid-1960s, And Tammy Wynette came from a generation of women who believed if it was prescribed by a doctor, then it was okay. Failing to get into any of this not only misses a huge piece of the story, it also misses one of the major points in even telling the story. If you're interested in things like that, more than you're interested in trashy tabloid style fiction. Aside from the disservice being done to the story of George Jones and Tammy Wynette, which I can promise you did not need an ounce of help from any screenwriter on the planet to be approximately 1,000 times more interesting than this TV show, viewers learning everything they're probably ever going to know about country music from this will be walking around with a completely fucked understanding of this genre's whole history. There are a lot of reasons that George Jones and Tammy Wynette, separately and together, matter to the history of this genre, but they were not by any stretch of anyone's imagination the first country artist to headline in Las Vegas. It would take me a long time to sit here and list all of the major country artists who had major residencies in Las Vegas. But the fastest way to correct this stupid claim is by bringing up a little thing called the Bakersfield Sound, which kicked off years before Tammy Wynette even had a record deal, and every major artist in the Bakersfield Sound movement routinely played headlining gigs in Vegas before Tammy Wynette ever even had that name. At this point, I guess the second best thing I can say about this TV series is at least there's only 3 episodes left. I'm legitimately disappointed in this. Never had any reason to suspect it was going to be great or the best thing to ever happen to country music, but knowing how shocking and intense and gripping the true story is, I never imagined someone could make it this bad, even if they tried. Maybe I just underestimated how hard certain people would be willing to try. There you go. That's it. I will unfortunately be back with a review of the 4th episode soon. Yeah.